They're complete hypocrites. They really don't care about that. They only care about their value system being taught in the traditional public schools in a unionized environment.
Welcome into another episode of Making the Leap. We are so glad to have you with us today. We have a guest that I'm thrilled about, somebody who I feel like kind of runs the gamut of everything within education, a wealth of knowledge. We have Erika Donalds with us today, who is the founder and chairwoman of Optima Ed, which I love, as I've been looking at, is really all about innovation in education. I think, and I'm going to call you an expert on the school choice arena. You've served on a school board, and so I think we just have a lot to share today with people.
Erika has been a great friend already to my broadcast, my radio show. I spent some time with her at Turning Point, Charlie Kirk's convention out there
in December.
Phoenix back in December, and we've talked on my show since. And she happens to be married also to one of the prolific crusaders on Capitol Hill right now, Byron Donalds, the representative out of Florida. So, Erika, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I feel fancy. I feel like you just came from Fox. Is that right? Working, or you doing a hit with Fox, and now you're over to us. So I feel like we're kind of big time.
Very nice.
Stuart Varney, he's a big proponent of school choice, so he's celebrating School Choice Week like most of us are.
Yes, I love that. I saw that. In fact, I went to go put that out on social media, and I happened to see that you had put that out on social media as well, that is finally back to being a thing again, which is exciting.
Yeah, School Choice Week, Erika, this is something that's obviously been a life's work of yours. You literally started a company devoted to it. Talk about Optima Ed, first of all. What is that you started?
I did. And, I spent 20 years in investment management before making the questionable life decision to run for school board. Just as a mom, I just wanted to do a community service and help improve schools in my community. But I found out quickly that that is not how to improve the education system, unfortunately, and instead decided to start a company, starting as a nonprofit, to help start charter schools, at the time classical charter schools in Florida. I was able to open 4 of those. And then during COVID, we had a need for a virtual program, obviously, as everyone did. And we built something that I would send my own kids to, and people really liked it. They wanted to continue in that program. I met up with Adam Mangano, became my co-founder, and we created the world's first virtual reality school, Optima Academy Online, now available across the country, and in 13 of those states, tuition free. We have over 800 students. We sell VR field trips, VR curriculum, and it's all centered around a traditional knowledge-rich and content-based education that is so desperately needed in schools across our country.
So right off the bat, when you talk about virtual reality, I already feel like I have people that, kind of get that blank slate, look glazed over. No, thank you. We're not going to go down that route. What is it about that does draw so many people to this kind of a program? Because it is, I think for many, it's an unusual way to go. People want to dismiss it. And I'm not touching technology. So what is it that is the draw?
Or what does it even mean, Erika?
Well,
if you could define it, what does that mean?
Absolutely. We can start there. And that's the beauty of school choice. There's all different innovations that can come about when parents have agency, and innovators like Adam, who came up with this amazing idea, that instead of going to Zoom school, because we have a portion of our communities that want online education, and they use it to supplement sometimes their homeschooling, or sometimes they just want more flexibility. They want to be more involved with their children's education. And instead of looking at a checkerboard of faces for your instruction, our students, including one of my own sons, puts on a VR headset and they go to the moon to learn about the lunar landing. They go to ancient Rome. They go to Independence Hall with our constitutional experience. They go to the front lines and learn about World War II. And so it is an immersive experience that actually drives home the content-based learning that so many of us are advocates of, especially in a classical model of education. And it's a wonderful alternative to the checkerboard of faces or Zoom school that many experienced during the pandemic for those families who do want to school at home, but want this enrichment tool that is really amazing when it's used properly in a VR headset.
School choice broadly, Erika, in the state of Florida, Governor DeSantis there, we know it's one of the 13 states, I believe now, that offer universal school choice. Yours is one, Florida is one that I think we reference quite a bit. When we hear about Republican opposition to school choice, often the Republican opposition is, well, we don't like our small communities, our rural communities and these small school districts and the public school that's the employer maybe in the community, we don't like them under attack. They're fine. They're not radical like the big city schools, so we want to leave them alone. And we don't want to hurt them, and we don't want to discourage attendance. Florida, as I understand it, maybe you can speak to this, has not seen small rural school districts deplete. Quite the opposite, in fact. It is my understanding. Can you speak to Florida's experience and your work with charter schools?
Yeah, that's right. We do find in our rural communities, school choice helps the families who the public school is not working for. And usually there's only just one public school in those communities. And it helps them to find an alternative that's going to work for their child. It actually helps the school as well. Because if the school is not working for a child, that child is taking up so much attention and resources and trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. So when that family has the agency to go somewhere else to do online learning or a small private school, maybe a micro school, it actually helps both the child, their family, and the school to operate better and to serve the students that they are serving better. So we've seen that in Florida. But it's really important what you're talking about. In Tennessee, they have a special session this week to consider Education Freedom Act in their state that the governor's really pushing. And the opposition is coming from Republicans, many of them in rural communities. We saw this happen in Texas as well when Governor Abbott got involved and helped to unseat a lot of those anti-school choice Republicans and now has the majority that he needs to get an ESA bill passed. I think that people need to understand that in every study, around school choice, the improvement took place both in the choice schools as well as in the public schools that are around those choice environments. And so a rising tide does lift all boats in this situation because everyone is getting what they need. It doesn't mean people are going to leave en masse from public schools. That has not been the case, even where universal choice has been introduced. So we cannot be afraid of giving people agency and allowing them to choose the environment that's best for their children.
Earlier, you made a comment, and I want to come back to it for a second because I thought it was really interesting. You mentioned being on the school board and that was not the place to, make effective change. And I understand school boards are obviously, they're coming up under a lot of scrutiny. There's a lot of pushback. There's a lot of issues. But for example, Chris and I, we have a friend who is going to be running for a school board seat. Yep. He's a parent. He's vastly interested in what is happening in the district, wants to stay involved proactively. What advice or what direction would you give someone who says, well, this is my option, this is what I am doing, and I do want to stay with it. I don't want to sit back and be passive. I want to be engaged. What kind of advice would you give to somebody who sees that as the option and wants to step in?
I think it's wonderful when people are willing to run for school board. It is important work. It's very important for protecting our children from what otherwise the teachers' unions and other special interests would do to them in our classrooms. So they are the front lines, especially if you have a voting majority. I did not, so I spent very frustrating 4 years in the minority. However, if they are on the school board, one, they can be a voice. They can be a voice for parents on that school board, even if they don't have the votes. I did pound the table a lot, and I know that those issues came to light because of my presence there, and that was important. If you have a voting majority, you can vote and create policies that protect families or allow them an option outside of their zone school, whether that's public school choice. So there's certainly some things that you can do. However, the monopoly is the problem. And sometimes I caution our friends on the Republican side who think that if we control the monopoly, then it's going to be okay. But it doesn't matter who is in control of the monopoly. The monopoly is the problem. So you have to break the monopoly. And it doesn't matter who's in charge of it. A monopoly is never going to serve its customers or its families in this case in the way that a free market competitive environment will when you have to compete for students to stay with you and therefore funds. Also, in a public school environment, much of the time, you're a 5-person or a 7-person, or maybe a 9-person board, but you have, in my case, 7,500 people, the majority of whom are working against you every day. They don't agree with you, and they are married to the system, and their interest is for that system to continue. So whatever you vote for on the dais, just like whatever they vote for in Tallahassee, they will find a way to legally get around it. And that's what I experience, and that's what I see experienced on school boards every day. Doesn't mean it's not worthwhile work, but I think creating competition and education freedom and empowering parents is what's really going to change the system for the better.
Well, and I think it's exactly what you said too, having just another voice out there as somebody who might offer, just that countering opinion or that countering thought. I think sometimes Republicans and Democrats alike, we all kind of get stuck in the what we know instead of kind of looking out beyond that. And even given this idea of like virtual reality education, that's something that I don't think a lot of people are aware even exists. And sometimes we have to present those ideas. So I think I totally agree with you. I just was curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Erika, the Supreme Court has just taken up a case on religious charter schools, faith-based charter schools. And I think it's Oklahoma specifically that's, the attorney general there, governor there, who have said, or at least a lower court, forgive me, I might be mixing who weighed in on this, but ultimately the argument is that to exclude state monies to charter schools with a faith basis, that is discriminatory. The Supreme Court's going to weigh in on that. I know you're not here to handicap what the Supreme Court's going to do, but that's an interesting case that we're watching, certainly.
Absolutely. And I'm not an attorney, but the Supreme Court has weighed in on similar cases in the past, and they have ruled in favor of government funds going to religious institutions in an equal manner as non-religious or secular institutions. Frankly, I think anyone who thinks that the public schools have no, quote, religion in them and that they're secular or neutral is ridiculous. They are definitely teaching a value system that one could compare to a religion. So I absolutely think that parents should have the ability to go to a charter school or private school that aligns with their values and their faith. I think the Supreme Court is going to uphold that. If the history is any indication in these other cases, that they cannot be discriminated against because of a value system or a belief system that may be religious or non-religious.
So when people say,
I'm hopeful about that.
Erika, when people say, well, that's separation of church and state, people like to shout that, and I can hear people maybe hearing you say that now, and they say, well, now wait a minute, you can't use state money, taxpayer money, to fund a religious Christian school, you say?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, are we going to no longer allow Medicare and Medicaid to go to Catholic hospital systems the same way? What about Pell Grants and other college funding? Are we not going to allow any Catholic or Jesuit schools to receive those funds either because they're religious as well? They only apply that to K-12 education, and we know that that is rooted in opposition from the teachers union who don't want children to have a choice and families to have choices outside of unionized public schools. They're all for universal pre-K. Many of those pre-Ks are run by churches, and they have no problem for those funds to go to those pre-K institutions run by churches and religious institutions. So they're complete hypocrites. They really don't care about that. They only care about their value system being taught in the traditional public schools in a unionized environment.
Of course, the classic argument always comes when we have this debate on the other side, and that's often from our homeschool friends and our Christian school friends, many of them rightly skeptical, and they say,
want nothing to do with.
I don't want your state money.
Nope.
Because that means state control. You've probably heard that. Do you have a thought on that?
Well, in every state where we have advocated universal school choice, there has been a carve out for homeschool families that do not want to take the money, and making sure that we preserve their right to do so, to both homeschool their children and not take the funds, not be an ESA student, but to remain a homeschool student completely disconnected from the state or any of its requirements. I'm very strong on homeschooling and parents' right to homeschool their children without government interference, and I would never advocate for any policy that would interfere on that.
The virtual reality program that within this Optima Ed, where does the funding come from for something like that? You mentioned that there were some, I believe in some states that offered this program as a free option. If I heard you correctly, I might be wrong, so you can correct me on that.
Well,
what does that look like? I'm just curious how that all works. I'm fascinated by it because of this issue with funding and where money comes from and who has control.
Yeah. One of my superpowers is government approvals. As a former CPA and compliance officer, writing the applications and navigating the bureaucracy to government approvals has been something that we've done through Optima Ed that's really helped us to help more families. So in Florida, we have a virtual charter So families can enroll through the charter at no tuition, obviously. We also accept the scholarships in Florida. So if a student is on the ESA platform, one of the universal choice platforms in Florida, they can use those funds toward individual courses or VR field trips, whatever their choice. And then in other states like Arizona, where they also have the ESA program, we qualify there. So everywhere that there is an ESA program that offers virtual courses, we have gone there to get approval to allow families to access the courses and the curriculum tuition free or using their state dollars.
How did you get how did you get teachers on board, people on board in terms of creating a curriculum for something? And you mentioned, your son sitting there, learn about the moon, he's going to go to the moon. How did that come to be? And as a teacher, I guess I'm just like thinking through all the logistics of how that would work and where my materials would come from and how I would create that. And I find it really interesting because I know this is something that is not being talked about as an option for people. And
right.
Especially when you combine it with classical education, which you have mentioned. And I think marrying those two almost seems a little counterintuitive for proponents of classical education, yet I can completely see why it would be amazingly beneficial to be reading authors based out of Europe and traveling and seeing, I can see where those connections could be made automatically.
Oh yeah, it's awesome. And honestly, I would have never have thought of it. My co-founder, Adam Mangana, who is just a brilliant mind. He actually has a degree in the classics from Brown, but don't worry, he's fine.
He's qualified.
He came out of there fine from the South, played football there, but also had a minor in computer science. And he ran independent schools before joining Optima. And he's the one who piloted this VR learning during the pandemic. So he's that unicorn of having the technology background as well as a degree in the classics that brought those two things together. And he actually created teams to create this curriculum. Some of the curriculum is in Canvas, which many people are familiar with. There's reading, there's videos, and there's assignments in Canvas. But then there's an experience in VR that just drives home that learning, whether that's on location. Like if you're reading Arabian Nights, we have a whole scene from the book where you would be to have that discussion with your classmates. So it just takes that learning to the next level and allows teachers to use the environment for learning. In math, we use math manipulatives in the 3D environment, for example. So you don't have to go ordering your manipulatives in order to do mathematics. But the team is an engineer, so a VR three-dimensional builder, an instructional designer, and then a content expert, like a history major. And so those teams are putting together this curriculum, which is already complete. We've been teaching K to 10. We're moving up to 11 next year for the last 3 years. And we have our curriculum approved through the state of Florida, as well as accredited through Cognia, which is important to a lot of families because they want to make sure that their credits are going to work towards graduation.
Now, is that something, Erika, anybody can participate in? I mean, can any school, Christian school, private school, micro school, homeschooler, can they work with you?
They can, yes. And some of them will take our entire curriculum and use that. But a lot of schools, we're working with over 100 schools right now across the country, and they have access to our VR library. We train their teachers, and they might have a class set of headsets, and the teachers, when they're teaching about, the lunar landing, they take their kids with their headsets and go to the moon and just have an immersive experience that drives home that lesson. So they have the flexibility to use the locations and the other 3D assets in the way that they see fit with whatever curriculum that they already use in their classroom.
So I can see that then as being an answer, this VR as an answer to people who are afraid to pull their children from say, a public education setting where they're not going to have the maybe if they're going to a smaller school, they're not going to have the wealth of opportunities with all the different science courses, say, or all the different English courses. But yet this is a way that a smaller school or a co-op can say, no, we actually can do forensics this way, or we can do a unit within, I don't know, space or, things like that. This is a way to expand those opportunities is what I think it's kind of coming down to as well for people who maybe if you have that library, you're not buying a whole curriculum, you can go in and look at individual areas. Is that correct?
100%. It does empower families to be able to homeschool, because we talk to so many parents and they don't consider themselves homeschool parents, right? They don't want to do all of the teaching. They might feel comfortable teaching in an area they have some background knowledge, but they don't want to teach physics or they don't want to teach algebra. And so they can, select this on a course by course basis. And a lot of states have virtual programs that can do that, but they don't have a great reputation for high quality curriculum. And I can tell you right now, I would not send my son to a school that was not the most rigorous curriculum that was really going to help him to thrive and succeed. And both my child and my co-founder's 2 children are in the school, thriving, learning, just like they have in classical traditional environments where they're in person. So I vouch for it, but it's not for everyone. And that's what's beautiful about school choice. It is a great option for families, and it provides flexibility. So for our son, he can travel with us more.
You and your husband both, it's interesting, you mentioned you as, and your family, your husband, a member of Congress, pretty successful and high-profile member of Congress, by the way, and I don't know where he comes down specifically. I can't honestly tell you I know what he's had to say publicly about education. I'm sure you guys share the same agenda and opinion on education, but as the feds discuss it, as Donald Trump has discussed putting Linda McMahon as the head of the Department of Education, he has said abolish the Department of Education. What, if anything, do you believe is the federal government's role or response in education? And maybe if you could expound a little bit on, maybe if you care to speak to your husband's position on that as a member of the federal government.
Well, I can tell you Byron was in the state legislature for 4 years before going on to Congress and ran a lot of education bills, including the first Hope Scholarship, which allowed any student who was victimized to take a scholarship to a private school. And that was HB1 when he was in the legislature. So he was on education committees. It was a major reason why we got involved in government in the first place, because we saw an opportunity to really pursue our passion. When it comes to Donald Trump, I also have recently joined America First Policy Institute as the chair of their Center for Education Opportunity. And our goal there is to implement what Donald Trump promised the American people. And the first one is to abolish the Department of Education. So I am working with other team members on a plan to carry out that promise to eliminate the job of Linda McMahon, who also was the chair of AFPI prior to her confirmation. And there's lots of ways to do that. People have ideas about how that funding should go to the states and maybe empower parents or be parent directed in some other way. I think that will show itself over time. I think a lot of people make a good argument that the federal government should not be involved in education at all. But one does have to consider, and I think there's an interview by Condoleezza Rice some time ago where she called it a national security concern. The education crisis in our country, the fact that only 1/3 of our students can read and do math on grade level, is a national concern for our security and for the preservation of our republic. So while I don't want the federal government telling parents what to do or states what to teach, I do want to see somehow parents empowered with the ability to vote with their feet, even if they live in a state where the union is just such a stronghold that it's not going to allow them to do that. So whether that comes in the form of a tax credit or some other 529 reforms, I think we're going to be working through those solutions over the next 4 years.
Can I stay with that for a moment? It's significant when you talk about the underperforming nature of students in this country and that it's a national security concern. Other nations, particularly China, greatly surpass us in terms of test scores and performance and things like that. What do you attribute that to? I think I know this answer, but what do we attribute the decline in kids' ability to learn and retain this critical information?
Well, there are certainly a lot of factors that have played into it, but if I were to sum it up in one, it would be the monopoly that I mentioned earlier. A monopoly is not going to be performing well when it doesn't have to. It can hold on to its money and its power without really any accountability because it can't lose any customers. And so that's what we've seen. The teachers' unions have been a force for evil since their existence and their power over education. Unfortunately, they protect poor performing teachers, and they've turned the teaching profession into something that is not revered, they are not treated as professionals as they should be. And we really should be elevating great teachers and rewarding them and getting rid of bad teachers The Mackinac Center just posted an excerpt from a collective bargaining agreement where a teacher could be drunk in class 5 times before they're fired.
Wow.
I mean, that's the kind of thing that we're seeing from teachers' unions across the country. So they're a major factor in the detriment of our schools. They don't want to allow for accountability for student performance. And then overall, we've been asleep at the wheel. I think my parents' generation were not paying attention. They thought that things were going fine in our public schools. And they are waking up and are some of the most active and vocal about how poor the public schools are now, and regretting that when their children were in school, they were not more active. And they were really entrusting to the experts, supposedly, that things were going fine. And we know now that they were not. We also have allowed special interests like Planned Parenthood and anti-Semitic interests to get into our schools and prioritize those ideologies over reading, writing, and arithmetic.
I will tell you,
I would say those are 3 of the many factors that are a problem in our education system.
It's so interesting you mentioned the anti-Semitic factor, because here we are, this same week of School Choice Week is also, this week is Holocaust Remembrance. And I saw a survey that said younger people are woefully ill-informed, if not malinformed, about the events surrounding the Holocaust, the number of Jews killed, and some even doubt that it happened at all. And as you see our college campuses swarming with pro-Hamas protesters here in the last few months, where does that come from? I think you just alluded to it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And it didn't come when they got to college. So on October 7th, 2023, we saw on display the anti-Semitism that has permeated our public schools for a generation, it seems like, because these kids did not come up with these views over the last 6 months when they were in college. As you stated, it's because they were not taught about the Holocaust, or they were maybe taught that it was questionable, may not have even happened. And that's why states like Florida have laws now in place to ensure that every child is taught about the Holocaust. And we have actually detailed in through our legislature and DOE what needs to be taught and how it needs to be taught, and also punish those who have espoused anti-Semitism or doubts about the Holocaust in a classroom where they have a captive audience of students. So we've taken it very seriously. I believe other states have as well.
Every time this kind of topic comes up, and then you talk about the dismantling of a lot of the DEI programs that's happening across the country as well, which I think fully falls in line with everything that you're saying. I think all of this together shows a lot of promise for what might be down the road. But I think, like you said, this didn't happen in the last 6 months. We're talking about years and years and decades of work that's been at play that now has to be undone. And I think it is through programs things like you've started with a VR program, to even the unschooling movement, to classical Christian private school, all these things coming together. It's encouraging, and it's nice to kind of have that encouraging momentum when sometimes it just feels like a lot of heavy on top of heavy when we're trying to just pass bills in states to allow people the access to things like this.
I guess I would ask that, Erika. Do you see the momentum shift now as being unbeatable, or do you see that it could backslide? Meaning, COVID seemed to break, I think, this stronghold of the, if you want, education industrial complex. But I wonder, can we backslide? Will people, if people aren't already starting to kind of fall asleep again, take their foot off the gas pedal for choice?
Yes, absolutely. We have to be vigilant in continuing to dismantle the education industrial complex, as you called it, and the stronghold that these ideologies have in our schools. We can't let it for a second. They haven't. No. That's clear. They have won. They have won our schools. They have won the youth, the culture, and we are just starting to chip away at what they have built so successfully over a generation. And so we cannot let up. It's great what's happened with the DEI and rooting it out, but remember, these are adults that voted for that. There are adults that are demanding that DEI be rooted out of our institutions. But the kids, a lot of them do not believe this. Now, we've made some progress, thankfully, Turning Point, for example, with the youth vote, and really turning a lot of them towards conservatism. It's very encouraging, but it's just the beginning, and it could be reversed just as quickly as the success came about over the last few years. We have to be as relentless at rooting this out as they have been in implementing it. And I would say that probably means we have to amplify our efforts even more.
Well, Erika, thank you very, very much for all of your time and all of your work. We are big fans. And now that I've had the chance to talk with you a few times, I hope we can have you back. I hope you'll keep us posted on your progress. We'll be watching closely what the Trump administration and your work with the
America First Policy Institute. That's incredible.
Yeah, if we
awesome.
actually get to a place where we're talking about decentralizing the Department of Education, that would be quite an achievement, I must say. So we will watch it carefully. But thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks for having me. We'll be back to talk about the dismantling of the DOE.
I love it. I love it. Thank you, Erika.
Thank you.
And that'll do it for this week's edition of Making the Leap. If you enjoyed the show, hope you'll let us know by giving it a 5-star review and a written review at Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And always, you can keep in touch by sending us an email or keeping in touch on
Absolutely.
Twitter.
And we'll include links to Optima Ed for people that are interested in learning more about this. It's a fascinating website to go on and start checking out.
X, I meant, not Twitter, X or Facebook. So stay in touch, and we will see you back here next week on Making the Leap.
Making the Leap is a podcast presentation courtesy of the Herzog Foundation. We'd love your feedback by rating us and commenting on the show.
And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time on Making the Leap.